Okay, sounds good. So welcome everyone to this session on understanding Gen Alpha, why it matters for education and business. I'm Beth Grzelak. I'm the Learning Design Lead and a Community Coach with Ford Next Generation Learning. And as I was mentioning to some of the folks that jumped on a bit early, I'm not an expert on Gen Alpha, but I'm a very interested observer of Gen Alpha. And so I've just been trying to do some learning on my own about this rising generation and the folks that these are the students that are starting to populate our schools. And so just trying to understand a little bit about who they are and how they will impact us as educators, us as employers, and what the world looks like for them, and just try to understand them a little bit. So I'm really excited to bring this to you today. This is just meant as an interview, overview, and an introduction to this group today. And I hope it'll pique your curiosity and get you interested in learning more about this group, this generation. But in a bigger sense, why do this presentation, for example, for ACTE? And, the reality is this is our emerging generation. This is the generation that, while there is some still, I think, conversation about when did this generation officially start, some will tell you it started as early as 2008. Some will say it started as late as 2012. The consensus is that it started roughly 2010. And it is now peaking out, and we are transitioning yet again to another generation because they are identifying the last group of Gen Alphas as being born in 2024. So this is the age group that is now in our schools. If you think about 2010 and do that math, they are now the freshmen, maybe even some of our sophomores in the schools, and they are certainly now populating all the way back through to kindergarten. So it's important that we begin to understand and know a little bit how they, who they are and how they differ from Gen Z. And very quickly, within the next 2 to 4 years, some of these folks will be in our workforce, and all of them will be preparing for the workforce in some way or another over the next several years. So I think it's really central to the work that all of us do in the variety of roles that we might inhabit and are part of this conversation today. So just to help us get started a little bit, just wanted to find out, Jess is going to put up a quick poll. So what generation are you part of? Just to get a sense of who's in the audience and where you are. I will tell you I'm square in the middle of Gen X and the proud parent of 2 Gen Zers. And they like to remind me every day they are Gen Z, and that I'm really, even though I'm Gen X, they remind me a lot that I'm a boomer. That's how they like to refer to me as. But let's see who we've got in the audience. So you all are not seeing the poll yet, but we're leaning really heavy in the Gen X end. More than about two thirds of our audience is Gen X. About a third is millennials, and we've got a smattering of Gen Zs in the audience. Looks like got about 80% participation. Give you just one more second to share if you'd like to share. What generation are you part of? Are you a Gen Xer, millennial, Gen Zer? If you are a Gen Xer or a millennial, you are a parent probably. If you're a younger Gen Xer or a millennial, you are probably a parent of a Gen Alpha student or, student. So Jess, do you want to go ahead and share the results with folks so they can see? I hope everybody can see that. So again, about 2/3 of the audience is Gen X. Stacy says, I got 3 millennial sons. So yeah, Gen X, some of us have millennials. Some of us as Gen Xers have Gen Zs, couple, depending on where you fall in that Gen Xer generation. If you had them a little bit later, you might have a few some of you might have some Gen Alphas. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on then to our next slide. So this one really interesting source of data about the generations, particularly Gen Alpha, comes out of a marketing group in Australia called McCrindle. So this is a graphic they put together that just helps us distinguish a little bit what some of the markers might be between some of the generations and what distinguishes them. So you can see, particularly between Gen Z and Gen Alpha, Gen Z is that scooter generation. It was really interesting. I was working with a colleague yesterday, and she was telling me she never learned to ride a bike because she was a scooter kid. And I was like, really? What does that mean? And she's like, yeah, I was just on that cusp. You either rode a bike or you learned to ride a scooter. And so I thought that was really interesting. I had never really heard that before. They had Spotify. Gen Alpha has smart speakers. So, and you can see as you go along the bottom there, we start getting into thinking about leadership styles, their ideal leader, in how they are influenced, and even how we think about marketing. So Gen Z is heavily influenced by social media. We're going to see Gen Alpha influenced in different ways, more in real time kinds of things. So just another thing to help us kind of think about who they might be as they begin to get older. So why are they called Gen Alpha? Well, Gen Alpha, alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, and Gen Alpha is the first generation that is born entirely in the 21st century. And it looks like they will be the largest generation in history. They are the first generation that is characterized as being true digital natives. And I'm going to give that with a little bit of a caveat that we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But that is one of the things that they are being typically characterized as, being true digital natives. Their lives, of course, are shaped by the climate crisis, by the pandemic, as many of you as educators in particular know, as you've had to teach them through that. They are also very much aware of mental health, both mental health in terms of being healthy. In that way, they prioritize mental health, and that I think we'll continue to see them prioritize mental health and work-life balance as they age. Many of them see their parents, relatives, caregivers working remotely, and that will impact, again, as they age, about how they think about work and how they want to work. And of course, all of them, their lives have been impacted by artificial intelligence. And we can think about artificial intelligence in a lot of different ways, including, hey, Alexa, or hey, Google. So remember, these students from the very moment they were born, essentially, could ask Alexa or Google a question, and that is AI. And so from the very start of their memory, they were able to use AI to get questions answered, to turn on music, everything. So their lives really have been impacted from the start by AI. Indicators are that they are focused on their family and they think they're future forward. There are indicators that they are climate activists and advocates, and that they are focused on sustainability. We saw that trend beginning in Gen Z. I see that in my own household with my own Gen Zers, and there is every indication that that will continue with Gen Alpha, and that comes out of all of the conversations around climate change, sustainability, warming, global warming, and other issues that are very much in the conversation, across the world. They are passionate about inclusivity in particular, and issues of social justice. You have to remember that for many of them, they are surrounded by people of a whole variety of viewpoints, religion, skin colors, a variety of spiritual practices, all of those sorts of things. And so they sort of accept all of those folks that are around them and see that as just a part of everyday life. They are very accepting, obviously, of folks of a variety of ways they describe gender and things like that. So as a general rule, they are very inclusive. They've grown up in that world, most of them, and they see that as just the way things are. As I've already stated, they are more aware of the importance of mental health and mental well-being. And, I should point out that while, these are characteristics globally, they are also based on research, the trends that we're also seeing generally in the US population as well. And so you'll notice that this says US Gen Alpha characteristics. So these are both global, but also US characteristics. The other thing that we know is they are spending a lot more time online than past generations. As I've noted, they will be more racially and ethnically diverse than any generation previous to this. They are more likely to grow up around college-educated adults than prior generations. Again, I say that with a caveat, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. They will interact mostly with their peers online and through social media channels. It is something that they have always known. I have friends that have some Gen Alpha children, and they may not have gotten iPhones early on, but they were still talking to their friends via iPads, via their parents' phones. That's how they connect socially. A term that's being applied to them is something called upagers. We know scientifically, we're watching the fact that they are biologically or physically maturing faster than previous generations. And so they are presenting to us as looking older than their age. They are also socially, in some ways, older than they appear because they are taking in so much information from online. So they have opinions, thoughts, they've been exposed to a variety of ideas. They may not always be right, but they have such a wide access to information that they can come across as knowing a lot more about certain things than they actually do. Because while they may be more mature, they don't actually have great filters yet for deciding, what information is quality information or good information. So that leads to the other part is while they might be coming across physically more mature or even sometimes socially more mature, they actually are, in terms of when it comes to people interaction, they are actually less mature, socially immature when it comes to people interaction because so much of their interaction is happening online. So I mentioned that, yes, these folks are digital natives, but are they? So it is always, when you're looking at a whole, in this case, millions of people, it's hard to make a generalization that fits every, individual in that group. And I think especially as educators, as future employers, we need to be mindful of that there are big exceptions within the generation. So we talk about them as true digital natives, but are they? Are all of them? And I think one of the things that we need to think about is when we say something like Gen Alpha are true digital natives, what assumptions are we making about what that means? We make an assumption that every student, for example, in our classroom has ready and wide access to a computer, to Wi-Fi at home, to something beyond their phone. It is true that the vast majority of our students have access to a phone, but they don't necessarily have access to anything beyond that. They might have access to a school iPad or a school PowerBook, but we know that there's lots of firewalls and lots of protections on that. So they aren't really having wide or full access to the internet, to the ability to, access games or quality educational activities. They don't necessarily have the Wi-Fi at home to go out and learn on their own, to engage in online learning, to learn, for example, how they might build their own computer, which is probably something that some of your children have done. So when we talk about whether or not they're true digital natives, yes, they are in some ways, but we have to remember that not all of them are truly digital natives in the way that we think that they might be. Also, there is an increasing pushback, especially outside of the United States, against exposing students at younger ages to, digital communication. So coming out of the pandemic, not in the United States, but in other countries, we saw a real pullback to connecting via social media. So I also mentioned that they see parents and families working remotely, but who, again, are the students that are seeing parents and family working remotely? We need to remember that those are largely professional white-collar jobs and families where students are seeing that happen. It is not an assembly line worker student or family where they are seeing that happening. That is not a custodian or child caregiver or someone like that whose student is seeing their family working remotely. So we need to remember that these generalizations, again, don't necessarily apply to everyone, and we need to be thoughtful and careful when we apply all of these things to the students in our classroom. And again, that third thing, we are more likely to see, students are more likely to grow up around college-educated adults. And that is true. It is more likely than in any previous generation that they will grow up surrounded by more college-educated adults. But what does that statement apply? What we do know is, yes, more of their parents were likely to have gone to college, but has that ultimately led to a higher income? We know that we have a whole generation, 2 generations, millennials and many early Gen Z folks that are struggling with student debt. We know that some of those folks are struggling to have jobs. They did not get the jobs that sort of equated to the kind of income they thought they would have as a result of their college experience. So our Gen Alpha students are seeing parents and other members of their family who went to college who are not realizing sort of the American dream from attending college. And we know that we have an increasing number of Gen Z students that are seeing options outside of college as being really viable and a good choice post-secondary. My guess will be that we will continue to see that trend as Gen Alpha students continue to grow up and see their students struggling, their parents and caregivers struggling with debt and other things. So we know that they're going to be the most educated generation, but what will education look like for them in a general sense? We're going to see skills being valued over degrees. And in fact, just this week, a number of corporations and companies, including really big names, came out with a set of skills that they will be looking for in all of their employees. And that, I think, could be something that we will all need to be looking to. And I apologize because I just read about it this week, but I think it's called Soft Skills USA. It just was announced this week. but a number of these corporations have come together and said what they're looking for in their entry-level jobs. And so that's skills, I think, are going to be an increasing focus for Gen Alpha learners. They're going to be looking for real-world simulations, on-the-job training, personalized learning. Remember, they can find anything they want on the internet. So they're going to want experiences and learning that's really personalized to their interest and to their needs. You're starting to do that for them already with some of the digital learning in particular that's being offered in schools. But at the same time, it's really interesting. They want shared learning. They do want to work collaboratively. They do want to work with one another. They do want project-based work. They will also learn at a faster pace due to AI, machine learning, and smart tools. So what will it look like more specifically for them? We're going to talk about digital integration, visual and interactive content, personalized learning, collaborative experience, short form content, and micro-learning. We'll talk about those in just a minute, but I want to stop for a minute and ask you, so what do you think so far? What are some of your initial thoughts, reactions, things that you know or have heard about Gen Alpha that you want to share with the group?
Go ahead, Evan.
One thing
Yeah, go
I've
ahead,
learned. I'm sorry. Me? Evan?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt anyone. One thing I've in talking about the digital literacy and yes, they grew up with phones, iPads, Chromebooks. It's easy to automatically assume they know how to use technology, and that's not the case. My stepson who's graduating this year is 18, class 2025. He struggles with a normal computer, and I think that's something that is definitely interesting because I've talked to employers, and they are, yes, these young people are coming in and they don't know how to organize files on a computer because they're used to Google Drive. Everything is sorted, they just search for the file, but as far as organization, that's not there. And something as basic as file hierarchy and things like that, that's just something I want to add in there. So I agree.
You're absolutely right. They also kind of poo-poo sort of what we think of as traditional tools. Like my daughter did not realize that there was Microsoft Word because she has always used Google Docs. It's things like that. So they are digital natives, but not around some of the things. They don't have a lot of knowledge about some of the tools that we still utilize sort of in office spaces, I guess I would say.
And that's
good point, Evan.
That's one of the things that we've noticed too, and we've worked with our districts to kind of go back to integrating Microsoft Office because they use Google Sheets, and the private sector is never going to use Google Sheets because it's not safe. So they need to come out learning Excel and some other things. But the other thing too is they've not had access to paper. So kind of a funny example, I had my 12-year-old niece come in over the summer and help us organize some things. She's a hyper analytical child, and we knew it would be right. But then we were like, okay, when you get the packets together, just paper clip them. And she's like, what's a paper clip? I mean, they've never had worksheets. All they have is Chromebooks. She had no idea what it was. And so their transition into the world of work is going to be a little painful.
I agree. And I think, again, that goes back to one of the things that we need to do as educators in partnership with our business partners, our post-secondary partners, is get them that career exposure, get them those opportunities for those industry tours, those job shadows, those internships, so they see some of that before they leave high school. They've experienced some of that. So they're not going into their first job asking a crazy question like, what's a paperclip?
Stacy, go ahead.
Yeah, all good points. I have noticed in my students and my grandkids especially that they have a lot of information, and it is a lot of misinformation like Beth alluded to. So I think it's really important that, like someone said, I can't remember, that they know, Evan, they've always been in a life where they have technology, the internet, Google, but they are not being taught how to use it appropriately and how to look for information that is accurate. Like one of my eighth graders told us that, told me and another student that she uh, is highly opposed to dolphins because they rape humans. And we're like, wait a minute, that can't be right. She's like, no, I read it. So we had to we had to show her how that was not quite correct.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, that's a scary but good example of the fact that access to information does not necessarily equal knowledge. And we really have to, again, as educators, help them understand the difference between information and knowledge.
Absolutely.
And really that it's the learning to discern quality information, quality resources, and so, and to help them make that distinction. Anybody else? Jennifer, in the chat there, you said exactly, we need to help them be critical consumers of all the information at their fingertips.
Beth, I'd like to add to the table that, you know, in my lifetime, my children had no idea what it was like to not have email and to not have communication because the internet wasn't a thing, right? And I think the new shift is this AI component. When you begin to talk about an interactive way on a personal level to communicate with technology, I think as educators and business owners, it's definitely one of the tools that this generation is going to have to be able to utilize to perform their jobs better. Because if they don't, I mean, it's the new alphabet, it's the new bacon. I mean, it's the thing that if you don't understand how to use it, you're going to be left behind in a professional environment because it is making everybody's job more proficient, efficient. So, you know, education needs to take a deep look at how they can respond to equipping students for the workforce with that tool.
I absolutely agree, and that is the number one conversation right now out there in the world is how. I mean, I know that in my role as a community coach working with different school districts and communities around the country, for several years we have said, you know, you're preparing your students for jobs that don't even exist yet. But the reality is that is more true now with Gen Alpha students than it has ever been, because AI is not changing the landscape in the next several years. It is changing the landscape literally in months. And it, you know, our pace of learning and the way that we are going to work is literally changing, you know, months, you know, over months rather than over years. And so we really are changing the way that we will do work, and you truly are preparing students for roles and work that don't exist. I have a junior in college. He's going into data science, and he's got a job doing analytics this summer. And I'm already like, I wonder how quickly AI is going to do the analytics work for him. What does that even mean for the kind of job he's going to have, you know, a few years from now? There's a little conversation going on in the chat. And this is, I love, Chantal, your comment, because I feel sometimes us older folks, we just, you know, kind of get on our little like old folks bandwagon, but it is true. Chantal says, to be fair, I had my own revelation in my early college days, coming to realize that just because something was in the textbook didn't automatically make it true. And I agree. I absolutely agree. So that issue of what's quality information, you know, has existed for a long time. It's not just an advent of since the internet, but I do think that the internet has exacerbated that issue. Absolutely. And I think, Jennifer, your point about school systems are not right now nimble enough to really adapt quickly. And you make a great point. It's part of the reason why we need to lean into our business partners to really help us make some of the shifts that we need to make. All right, we're gonna move on. So I'm thinking about how do we educate Gen Alpha? Some of you are already thinking about this. You've alluded to it in some of your comments, but we talked a little bit about they will learn best via digital integration. Again, I applaud some of you because I know some of you are already doing this. So we know Gen Alpha is comfortable with blended learning environments. I'm in lots of classrooms where we see them merging and moving back and forth between doing things on their Chromebooks or iPads to then moving back into working in groups, facilitated discussion with with the teacher, so on. They're going to want that. That's something that's expected. They're also, and that speaks to the second bullet as well. What's important though is that those devices are central to the work. So I think sometimes when I'm talking to students, they feel like teachers push them onto their Chromebooks or their iPads as busy work. And I think what this generation is going to expect is that those digital tools that are being used in the classroom are there because they are a meaningful part of the learning that is happening in the classroom. So how do we really demonstrate to them that what they're doing on their Chromebook or their iPad is truly meaningful and connected to the overall learning that they're doing in that subject or in that classroom? So visual and interactive content. So again, what we're learning so far from this, what we know of Gen Alpha is they process things much more quickly through visual media than text. They are engaging more deeply with content that allows for interaction and experimentation. So they like that ability to interact with things and experiment, because the big thing about this generation is they have grown up watching influencers. They have grown up watching a generation of people who are their own entrepreneurs, their own creators. And so they see themselves very much as being innovators and creators. So they really want to take content and make it their own. So you can see the visual and interactive. They want to navigate through images first, text as secondary, but ultimately what they really want to do is take all of that and somehow turn it and create it into something that they can own. That's really what they want to do with the visual and the textual information. That plays into the personalized learning. So again, not only do they want to take something and really make it their own, they want their learning to acknowledge their individual interests and strengths. So again, those of you who are familiar, for example, with project-based learning, or make that an integral part of your teaching and learning in your classroom, this plays into some of that personalized learning, where students have voice and choice in how they approach a topic or a driving question. They're given that agency, and you'll see, according to the Cambridge in 2022, personalized learning, they show greater knowledge retention in children born after 2010 compared to standardized approaches. So it's, I know, challenging to really differentiate learning, especially when Gen Alpha might be asking us to differentiate for 30 students in our classroom rather than just for different groups. But the more we can find ways to personalize that learning, the more likely we are to really not only grab their interest, but hold that interest and really maximize the kind of learning that they will do. So they love all that personalization. They want that opportunity to really innovate and be seen as a creator. They also want to be collaborative. They want to have those peer-to-peer interactions. They want to do group problem solving. They really do lean on one another. if it's structured. And the structured part comes in, as some of you mentioned, and as we know, because they are socially immature in some ways, while they want to do this, they will give up very quickly if it's not well structured, because they don't know how to navigate conflict well with one another. So they really do need that, those structured collaboration, teamwork, to be chunked and sort of baby stepped for them. They will get there and they will do it well and they will benefit from it and they will enjoy it, but we're going to have to chunk it for them so that they can get there eventually, which is why one of the things that, you know, I often talk about with my colleagues is all of this can't happen in high school. It has to start much earlier in their K-12 experience, because they need time to learn how to work well with others, so that by the time they are in high school and we want them doing this in a job shadow or an internship, or we want them doing more sophisticated projects with their peers, they have already gone through those micro-learning and chunking experiences, and they can bring it all together. You can see that they, according to Gardner, they will engage in that social learning when it's thoughtfully integrated, when we have done it in a planful way. And that gets again into and plays into the short form content and the micro learning. So in shorter, more focused segments, many of you, for example, will bring in guest speakers, you know, and we put a guest speaker from a business partner up in front of our room, and they talk at the students for a half hour, 45 minutes. They can't, they just can't. Students won't focus or dial into them for that long period of time. So we need to think about, when you're working with a business partner, let's have them do an introductory, you know, conversation with the students, but then how can we bring in something interactive to engage the students and kind of move back and forth between conversation with that business partner and some kind of activity to address this short form content and micro learning that really impacts our students. This breaking down, as we said, those complex topics, those complex, more complex ways of working, that group work, that collaboration, into steps so that they can learn those steps over time. They will learn better and retain more information in those smaller chunked bits than they will in a traditional lesson. We know this. This is something I'm sure that's not surprising. You saw this come in with Gen Z. It's going to continue probably even in a stronger way with Gen Alpha. So again, you know, based on what you're hearing, thoughts, comments, wonderings, anything that you're doing that's already shifting in the direction of the things that you just heard me say.
Beth, we've got a comment from Meredith.
Okay.
Meredith, did you want to share your comment?
Sure, I was just saying that, you know, it was an interesting concept about the personalized learning, because when you think about that in terms of the world of work, it's going to be hard to scale onboarding because it's typically very standardized. So it'll be interesting to see how the world of work adapts.
I agree. And I think that's a learning for our employer partner friends, is how do they address that with, as they're beginning to bring new, you know, this generation into work. And I apologize because right now I'm running blind. I can't see any of you, so.
Evan, you also left a comment. Would you like to share more?
Oh no, the comment was basically that. I mean, when I used to be in the classroom and students would grumble about, like, they don't want to do group work, they just want to get their work done and then move on. I would just tell them life is a group project. Even if you work for yourself or have your own business, you're going to work with other people. Whether it be a family, a career, higher education, military, whatever it is, you are going to work with other people. So you need to learn how to work with other people.
I think that's a great point, Evan. Yeah.
And Sarah, you've also left an incredible comment. Can you tell us about it?
Well, I was just thinking about how many times that we go to so many large, like everything's done all together, and thinking of all of our young students coming in and they're like, I'm not going to ask a question. This isn't meet my need. Like still don't know what's going on, and they're going to want this personalized approach. And all of us who may have been here for a while are thinking, we'll just do it as a large group, and this is how we've done it. And how do we meet the incoming needs with some of the practices we've done in the past? And then, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think it will be. The thing is, we learn and adapt based on all, every generation teaches us something new if we're flexible. I know, it's funny. I heard a presentation recently about Gen Z in the workplace, and my son is Gen Z, and he's getting ready to do an internship this summer. And so I came home and I'm like, this is what they're saying about Gen Z in the workplace, and you're all getting fired, 6 months after you start. And so I started to, share some of the things. And the first couple, he's like, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And then as I was continuing through the list, he was like, hold on. He goes, now that just sounds like people complaining. He goes, I don't think that's true. In fact, I think if you did it our way, that would actually benefit people. And I think that some of that is true. Some of us get set in our ways too. And, not everything about the younger generations is bad. And we all have to realize that, we can make some shifts too that might benefit everyone in the long run as well. So maybe it's not big group stuff. Maybe we recognize we do the same thing, but if we can break down into smaller groups to start that work or have conversations, maybe we'll be more productive. Who knows?
So
all right.
Those are all really good points. I did have a question. So I was looking through the points and taking some notes, and it said things like retention when content is delivered in 5 to 10 minutes increases, engage with content through interactions, learning through all these are great things. How do you get a staff to be on board with this when they clearly are not? We've always done it this way type thing. Mm-hmm. Or I learned this way. So, you know what I mean? You've heard it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I don't think we necessarily, I necessarily have the answer to that, except, I will fall back on data. What is your data telling you about how your students are learning? If your students if this generation of students, you're starting to see, test school scores and other measurements of achievement and student well-being starting to decline, then are we going to keep doing the same old, or how do we address some of that? And maybe that means we change some of the ways we're doing things. And we now are starting to see some data, some information that says this generation needs a little bit different. So, learning in a little bit different way than maybe a previous generation. So I always try and start with the data. We're all pretty much doing data dives and that sort of thing now, and try and use the data as a resource for why, and then share this kind of information. And I always start with my early adopters. If we're going to try this, let's try it with a group that's willing to try it and see how it goes. But it's a shift. It's a mind shift. This is not going to happen overnight. And we're just starting to see these students in the upper grades. But I think it's going to be change, or we're sort of we're at our peril if we don't. It kind of goes back to schools need to be more nimble. We're going to talk in a minute about some of the skills that are really going to be that big corporations, big entities are saying are going to be top in, by 2035. And, schools just aren't teaching those sorts of things now. So, there's a lot of pushback. We're seeing a lot of pushback on public schools now. And if there's perception is continuing that public schools aren't getting it done, then we're going to be facing some real challenges about what kind of schools do get it done. I think that's just my personal opinion, but I think we may have to do some things differently.
Beth, if I could throw a disc in on that conversation, I think as educators, and I'm a retired educator, I worked for 25 plus years and I'm a business owner now, but inside of what I think we fall asleep around is that we're a field of dreams. This consistency, this security that, public education's always been there. It's always going to be there. We had to make a mind shift, and we were in Mississippi, and a student doesn't have to go to school after 17. They can make a choice in Mississippi that this isn't relevant for my life and I can leave legally, right? And there's nothing we could do. So we had this shift where it, and of course our, academy mindset helped us move in that direction where we were customer service minded versus an entity that existed in our current structure. And I think as you start talking about what you just said, it's a very profound moment where you realize that if public education is not going to be the best answer for every student, soon they will have the choice. And we have to make a mindset that this is no longer a complacent, incalcitrant moment where we get to kind of dig our heels in and keep doing what we're doing because this will pass and something else will come forward. The real future of what we, do as educators and choose may be at a shift. When there are other options out there, I jokingly say, if anybody can take my wife, knock themselves out. I've been married for 26 years. There is no better choice than what we do for each other. And as a mindset, education, public education specifically, needs to begin to take that stance and say, we are the best choice. We do provide better than anyone else can. And making those shifts in the market and those adjustments to personalized learning and integrating to, to the needs of our about to be employees, that is essential in the survival of public education moving forward, my simple opinion.
Yeah, and to that point too, is we think about ultimately the students are our customers and our clients. Jennifer said, ask the kids if what we're doing is working for them. They'll tell you. They'll tell you, for sure. So kind of moving on. So what are the implications for their learning and working? You're seeing this. And so again, this is not a be all end all list, but this is just to get us thinking. And, again, I think you're seeing where this is going from some of the things that were said earlier. We need to balance the technological integration with that development of the human skills. Regardless of how good AI gets, it is the human skills that our students have that will always benefit them in the workplace and in life. And then we need to focus on teaching them that information literacy and critical thinking so that they can be good consumers of all that information they have access to. And that we need to then also design learning experiences that blend both those digital elements and physical elements. So opportunities for that physical collaboration and work with students, but how do we also bring in those digital elements that often they're comfortable with, and often in some ways they're further ahead than we are with that. For our, our employer partners and future employers, some of you mentioned this already, there are going to be different expectations around technology and work in the emerging workforce that's coming forward. And so they have to begin to think about how they are going to be prepared for that. And they're going to have to develop onboarding and training that aligns with that and with Gen Alpha's learning preferences. So it was funny, they just, McCrindle and a partner of those, Zigazoo, just did a survey of over 1,200 7 to 15-year-olds in the U.S. about what they imagine doing for work. More than a third of them thought they would travel for work. They wanted to see the world, which is really interesting. And we know most of us do not do that for our work. About another 24% thought that they would work from home and sitting at their computer. And only 14% thought that they would be working in an office, collaborating with other people. It could be a pretty big lift if most future students or future employees are going to be expected to be in an office working with other people. So how do they really prepare for a generation of employees that didn't necessarily envision that that's what their work life was going to look like? Diversity, inclusivity, and sustainability will be sought and valued in the workplace. So how does an organization put those values forward in a way that feels meaningful and authentic to their future employees? So pulling on resources from MIT, Oxford, McKinsey, the World Economic Forum, by 2035, research indicates these are the following skill areas that will be highly valued. None of this really probably comes as a surprise. You can see that AI is all over all of this, but number one is those meta skills down at the bottom: systems thinking, ethical reasoning, and those human uniqueness optimization. What a big word to really say our ability to connect with one another as human beings. That's really, bottom line, human uniqueness optimization. It means being able to connect to one another as people, as human beings, to see one another, see the value, see the strengths in one another, because AI can't do that. And man, that's not about sitting on one's phone or hiding behind a computer. That's really that collaboration, that teamwork, seeing that humanness in the other person. But you can see, folks, you know, good, bad, or otherwise. And as a former social studies teacher, you know, I'm looking at that list going, I don't know where social studies fits in there. We're going to have to think a lot more about skills and how do we teach our subject areas in a skills-based way? How are we wrapping these skills into our subject area so that our students are really prepared for their workforce? And again, that's where I think we really lean on our business partners to sit down with us and look at elements of our curriculum. Where can you help us identify a place in our curriculum, regardless of what we're teaching, where we can bring relevant skills into this to help prepare them for the workforce. So again, this is a quote, as I said, from the Crindle, which is really out there in the world, focusing on Gen Alpha right now. They're a primary voice. And it's because they're a big marketing firm. They're really focused on marketing. So the Gen Alpha is the emerging generation for marketing. So that's why they spend their time doing this. But I'll let you go ahead and take a look at this quote. But this kind of, again, in a general way, please keep in mind all those exceptions and why there's a need to remember those exceptions to a generalization about Gen Alpha or any other generation. And while it says formal education, I also want to remind you too of all the informal ways that they will educate themselves as well. All the informal credentials that, you know, they can do through Google, they can do through Microsoft, they can take a Coursera course, all of the informal and completely self-directed ways that they can learn as well, should they choose to. But ultimately, again, they will have more access to information than any other generation previous. And I just want to point out, because this was a presentation on Gen Alpha, of course, I used AI. And so this presentation will be shared with you, and I just wanted to be open and transparent. I used Claude 3.7 Sonnet, and I shared with you the questions that I asked. And then please know that I did not just stop everything it gave me into this presentation, but I went ahead and did all of the additional work. You'll also find at the end all of the references and citations for the work I shared with you today. So any parting comments before I turn it over to Jess real quick to share some information about ACTE with you?
I just want to thank you for sending me the invite after my retirement. Moved on to different mode in work. The company that I'm with is called Grade Results, but we find those same issues that are facing us to be true. Our educational environment is virtual. We do have an AI component called Amy, Ask Me Everything. And just as an anecdotal piece, we provide 24-hour 7-day a week instructional support for districts that we're with. But interestingly, we ran through our data, even though we have a whiteboard access where you can draw it out, text it out, virtual face-to-face instruction where a student can request a real human being to interact. Amy is who they interact with the most. I'm always perplexed that when you get the opportunity to exchange with a real human being about a need or a tutorial session, our kids are choosing more and more to interact with Amy. And, it's interesting that those skills through AI, it's one of the things that we think about a lot is how we move that tool into the workforce. And to have you in your presentation with, oh, by the way, guys, I augmented what I did using AI is just another way to nail that truth home. But thanks so much for reaching out to me. Forging GL was such a great partner while I was a superintendent. So thanks for having this.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Oops. All right. Jen or Jess, do you want to share about ACTE?
Yes, that's right. So today's session is part of an ongoing series we offer through our partnership with the ACTE Career Academy section and for Next Generation Learning. And it's all designed to help you support your work in transforming education through CTE Career Academies. And so if you found today helpful, we want to invite you to stay connected by joining the Career Academy section. So by joining, of course, you'll get access to additional resources, the network, and additional sessions like this one. And so you can see on this slide, there are a few details about joining the section. And the next slide, we have a QR code if you want to quickly scan and get to know a little bit more about how to sign up. So we'll, of course, email you all of this information, but wanted to put it out there as an additional benefit. But thank you all for joining.
Thank you all. Thank you for being here, and thank you for everything that all of you do, regardless of what your role is, either in schools or outside schools. Thank you for everything you do to prepare Gen Alpha and Gen Z for the world of work and for life. It's not an easy job, and really appreciate everything you do. Thank you.